welcome back to Stitches and Stories Studio, where we enjoy talking about writing, creativity, books, and the life that we build around them. I'm your host, Millie Story, and this is episode 14. I want to say I'm so glad that you're here, and for all the new listeners this week, welcome. I've got my cup of coffee. I hope you're enjoying something warm and joyful as we get started this week talking about reading. Personal reading, the reading life of a writer. Lately, I've been thinking about how much of a writer's life is shaped by what we take in, by the stories that we live, the voices that stay with us long after the books are closed. That has been especially true for me this week and over the past couple of weeks because I've found myself returning to one book and falling headlong into another author's work, all at the same time. I started rereading Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. At the same time, I've also been on a serious Steve Barry kick. I read The Tudor Plot last week, and I can tell you right now, I am fully in that happy stage where one book leads to another, and suddenly you realize you've become deeply invested in catching up on the whole backlist. And I have to say, I'm a huge fan of the Cotton Malone series. And it's the feeling that is one of the favorite things for me as a reader and as a writer. There's just something wonderful about finding an author whose work you can trust, whose storytelling voice fits that part of your brain that wants to stay up late when you shouldn't, promising yourself that one more chapter, and knowing darn well you don't mean it. You are going to finish it and regret it in the morning when you have to get up at 6 to go to work. And that's kind of where I'm beginning today, because I think as writers, we need to think about that kind of reading life. We need books that guide us, those that thrill us, and books that steady us. They even surprise and delight us, and they remind us why the stories matter in the first place. I mean, we are writers, and that's kind of how we got into this business in the first place, right? So let's talk about writing. The conversation so often turns outward. Word counts, deadlines, projects, and marketing and promotion. And all of that sure has a place in our lives, as writing is our business. We do have to make things, and we do have to finish what we started, and we do have something we want to put out there for the readers who enjoy our work. But reading also reminds us how language moves, how the emotion lands, how a story can pull a human being clean out of an ordinary life for a little while and carry them somewhere else completely, a world where dragons live or among the stars. And it's such a glorious thing that I think sometimes we take it for granted. I think one reason so many writers keep a handful of treasured books close by is because those books served as teachers for us at one point, and hopefully they still do. They feel like a friend, a companion. They open a door to the mind and let us leave our day-to-day lives for a little while. Bird by Bird is one of those books, and it has been for so many writers, and you can certainly understand why. There's a warmth and wit to it, certainly honesty, and when I picked it up again this week, I could feel right away that I was returning to a book with a pulse. Just like rereading any beloved book with such an interesting experience, it has a different person that, you're such a different person from when you read a book for the first time, and then maybe it's years before you read it again. And so much in your life has changed for you. Your experiences have changed. The attention to detail for you as the reader in the book is different, I think. I think you notice things that maybe you didn't the first time around. Perhaps you read it for inspiration the first time, and the second time it's more like visiting an old friend, putting the world to right, and kind of catching up where you left off, maybe seeing things you didn't see the first time around. The passages feel sharper, maybe some of the ideas softer, and the lines rise right up off the page as if they've been waiting for you to come back at this exact moment. And this is a deep pleasure for me of rereading. You are meeting the book again, and in some quiet way, you're meeting yourself again. And I love that. I love that for all of us. And then there's the other side of reading life, the part that feels less like revisiting an old friend and more like being swept up into a full-on reading binge. And this is where I am with the Steve Barry books right now. And I have been a fan for a long time. Lately, I've been in one of those moods where I just want to keep going through all the books that I've missed, that I set aside because I was focused more on the nonfiction reading, the reading that helped my craft or my productivity. And, the series got set aside. And this kind of author obsession to me is just pure fun. There's just no other way to put it. I just start to feel the pull of that world, the pacing, the style of the storytelling, and suddenly the reading life has momentum. And I've been reading about a book a week of his, while I'm also reading Bird by Bird this week as well. I think many readers know exactly what I'm talking about. I think as an author, it hits the sweet spot for you because before long, you're looking up from the catalog, you're figuring out what you have to read and what you still have waiting, and how quickly you can get your hands on the next book in the series. There's a special pleasure in trusting an author in this way. You settle into a cadence with their story. You notice qualities that make the book feel distinctly theirs. You get a sense of the rhythm in their scenes, the tension. And that kinds of questions that you like to ask, and the kind of questions that the atmosphere creates without putting words on a page. As a reader, that's deeply enjoyable, and as a writer, it can also be quietly instructive, sometimes without you even noticing. And that's the thing I keep coming back to. A rich reading life feeds an author on more than one level, and often all at once. Part of us reads for sheer pleasure, the other part for fascination, and sometimes the craft seeps in almost by osmosis. And when I am reading somebody whose work I admire, and I'm still fully the reader, and I've turned my writing brain off, I'm just there for the experience. But my writing brain still kind of hangs out in the corner, it's kind of lurking in the shadows, listening, trying to pick up on little hints for pace, energy, maybe how a chapter closes on just the right note, and notices information and how it's revealed, the way suspense is sustained, and a voice that carries authority. This kind of learning feels different from sitting down with a craft book and a highlighter. It's more fluid, it's more intuitive, it feels more lived in, and you're just letting a story teach you from the inside. And that's so important. It's good to not overthink what we're reading, not to focus on, hey, that was a great style, or how he rearranged the words in this sentence. Just kind of let it wash over you. Your brain will pick up on it, and that's okay. You have to enjoy it and just trust that if there's something to learn there, it's going to find its home in the back of your brain. So, as I mentioned before, as a writer, we need to have that writing life. They keep it alive, keep it personal. And without it, the work can begin to feel mechanical. You can end up circling around and around in the process and the productivity and forgetting all that original magic that you feel when you're reading for pleasure. That kind of probably inspired you to start writing in the first place. You had stories swimming around in your head. You were probably a big reader when you were a kid. I know I was. And that was a way, you saw a way as writing as an outlet for you. You read those other stories when you were a kid that inspired you or made you feel a certain way, or maybe, some escapism. And you subconsciously learned that that's a suitable way to put your stories into the world as well. And so you chose to write. And we don't want to lose that magic. I mean, how exciting was that when you were young, whether you were 10 years old or 20 years old, when you wrote your first story, whether anyone else saw it or not, just that energy you felt and how much in control you felt when you started putting those words on paper. And maybe, it wasn't a New York Times bestseller in that first draft, but that's okay. It's not meant to be. That's not its purpose. That's not its job. It did its job. It helped you find a way to get that story out of your head and onto paper or onto the screen, and helped you learn that it's okay. It's okay to do that. And it's an exciting journey, and it's exciting to be the subject of a fan. The way you feel about the books that you enjoy, the way I feel about reading Steve Berry books. Someone else is going to read my books and feel the same way. And how awesome is that? And if you're not a writer, maybe you're a painter or a comedian or a musician. It's still the same. You're finding your creative outlet, your creative purpose, and people are finding you, and they're getting excited about you the way you got excited about somebody that you admire, a mentor or an artist that you enjoyed when you were younger, before you got brave enough to put your creative work out into the world. So circling back to the books and how they arrive in your hands because they're useful. Sometimes you need information and guidance. Other books arrive because they call to you, they catch your eye on a bookshelf in the store, they stir curiosity, maybe a friend recommends them. But they promise you a world that you want to enter. It's healthy reading. It's a room. You want to make room, and I want to stress this. You got to make room for both kinds of books. You got to have those, like I mentioned last week, the writing craft books and Bird by Bird and On Writing by Stephen King. But you need the other books. You need the fantasy books, the romance books, the Christmas books, sci-fi. You need whatever your preferred genre is, whatever takes you into a role that you enjoy. You got to have those too. It can't be business all the time, or you're going to burn out. And you need to feed your soul. This is what we do. We're writers, so we're also readers. So this is how we feed our soul. But don't forget the other points too. There's value in gardening and sitting outside and relaxing in the sun or taking a hike. But let's not forget where the magic comes from, that escapism comes from. Our imagination is set on fire through books, and we want to do that for others as well. So I'm talking about joy, and the joy of reading, the joy of writing, and this is also so important. It's a way to spark your energy, to keep you going, to feed your soul, and to renew that well of inspiration inside you. The reading for pleasure, it keeps us connected. It can delight us with tremendous value. When you love books, when you're moved by them, when you become fascinated by an author and their body of work, you're feeding those emotional roots to your own writing. And I've always loved that feeling of becoming absorbed in a story. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is find those books where you're just obsessed or you just get so lost in what they have to share. It can be so inspiring in a very particular way for writers. You can begin to understand that the writing life is not just built one book at a time. It's built over time through recurring interest, through questions that keep haunting the writer, through the landscape and moral tension, the emotional concerns. They return again and again. And that's beautiful. It's gorgeous. What puts the words in your heart and onto the page. And there is something reassuring in seeing an author's larger body of work take shape. When you've got an entire series, it's enjoyable to read one book at a time, but when you stop and you can reread them all closer together without having to wait 6 months, a year for the next one to come out. It's kind of like a TV show. Do you watch it every week and wait till the next week, or do you wait until it's been out and you binge the whole series? And you get a different message, I think, that way. There are messages in each individual series or each individual show or each individual book that resonate with you. That's why you're reading it. But I think the message changes and you find new messages when you see the whole thing, binge the whole series, whether it's binging it through reading or binging it through watching it on TV and on Netflix. Some story elements start to come together that you didn't see before, and you get this larger picture. And I think our writing lives are kind of that way too. We get so focused on the day-to-day business of it, and those are the individual episodes or the individual books that we need to take a step back and find a way to renew ourselves, kind of refill our well so we can get that bigger picture of what we want. and enjoy the journey of starting a series and going from book 1 to book 10 or book 1 to book 3, and really find that inspiration to keep you going so you don't burn out on that, and don't get too bogged down in the craft and the tools and the software. Make sure that you're living this life and you're experiencing it. The reading life full of that kind of enthusiasm is so generous and so alive. It brings back so much energy into your system, and it's going to show up in your work later. The other thing to consider is, and I think one that matters especially for writers, is reading widely and deeply to build sort of a taste for what you like. And it can be a little bit hard to find it's going to be different for everyone. You can feel it in the care that a writer brings to their own work. It shapes what you admire, it shapes what you notice. Taste teaches you the difference between noise and resonance, between the surface flash of a trendy title and a title that endures. A strong reading life can be refined over time as well. You begin to notice the kinds of stories that stay with you and why, and that sort of develops your taste and what you enjoy. It can get down into even some minutiae, some sentence styles that feel vivid to you, the way the writer expresses the thoughts, forms the tension, keeps you engaged, the emotional turns that feel earned and memorable in a story. This awareness is going to become part of your writing toolkit, though it arrives gently, very subtle. It settles in through years of exposure, through reflection and response to the different types of books that you're reading. Reading is going to shape you, sometimes without you even noticing it, even as you're the reader simply enjoying a good book. And that's why we need to keep thinking about having a wide variety of what we enjoy reading, whether it's fiction, nonfiction. Try to enjoy or sample many different types of books. What I find interesting is what other writers keep on their bookshelves. It really tells you something about that person, and it can explain a little bit about how they write the way they do. It's something that a writer that you enjoy reading their series, and sometimes you might wonder what influenced them to write about that or to write about it in that way. And I bet if you saw their bookshelf of the books they choose to keep around them and surround themselves with, it would probably reveal the answers to some of those questions. Personally, I have a crazy variety of books on my bookshelf that I keep. Everything from medieval history to 20th century history of the making of the atomic bomb. I know that sounds really weird. I can't explain it, but to me it's just fascinating how a group of scientists came together and this is the idea they came up with. And so how they came about the idea of even creating such a thing, why they created such a thing, and then kind of everything that went into it, all of the rules and regulations that allowed it to happen. It's pretty interesting, and that fascination was sparked by a boss that I had at one time who was a chemist, and he gave me a book by Richard Rhodes, and I had never really thought too much about the atomic bomb and how it was made before until I read that book, and it sort of sent me down a rabbit hole. And so I was studying and reading about Oppenheimer long before the movie came out. But I also have a wide collection of fiction books besides the aforementioned Steve Berry, but I love cozy mysteries. I love Rita Mae Brown, and I love Debbie May Comer's Christmas romance books. I have a little shelf of those that I keep that I read just at Christmas time. Science fiction, Jules Verne, the list goes on. And so all of those things, all of those different interests, and that's an abbreviated list, in some way, shape, or form have either influenced subject matter or just influenced the way I think about things, or the way I analyze things, ask certain questions, answer those questions, and then how that kind of translates into the stories themselves. So as you build your own library, and I'm sure most of you already have one started, just think about look at it and see, is the theme broader? Could it be broader? Or is your collection of books sort of a single theme? Is there something else that you might venture into reading just to see if you like it? And if you don't like it, that's fine, don't read anymore. But you might find something new, and it might surprise you in interesting ways that could influence your creativity later. We can start to see that lineage of influence and taking root there in your creative life. So, and I've mentioned several times in this podcast about Bird by Bird, and let me just mention a quick aside. I know I talked about it last week in our craft books, and shortly after that episode aired, I realized that a couple weeks before, on March 23rd, that Anne Lamott was interviewed on the Creative Penn podcast with Joanna Penn. So if you're interested, I think you might find that an interesting interview. Go back and listen to that. I'm a little bit behind in my podcast right now. I do normally listen to Joanna Penn every Monday, but things have been crazy and I've missed a couple of weeks. So I can't wait to go in and dive into that myself. I went and I listened to a little bit of it, but I haven't been able to sit down and dedicate some time to it. So I hope you would go back and listen to that. If you think that you would find that interesting, let me know what you think. Hopefully by next Tuesday when the next episode airs, I'll have had a chance to sit down and get caught up on those as well. But I've been reading like crazy, and I've set aside the podcast in exchange for reading. So drop me a line at Millie@Stitches and Stories and let me know what you think of the book and or the podcast. Another kind of aspect of filling your creative well through this reading deep and wide, we can say, is that some books are going to slow you down in the best possible way. Like I was just referring to missing out on some podcasts because I've been spending all my spare time reading. And that's a good thing because I've been, like I said, reading for instruction and for craft and also reading for escapism. And that's perfectly fine. That's, it's a great way to sort of change how you're learning something, and it keeps things from getting stale. And reading the same old books for escapism, you start to kind of lose interest in that too. So it's good to change it up a little bit, and let it, leave you sitting for a moment after the page or after the chapter, and let that feeling of what you just read kind of settle in to your chest. And think about it. How did it make you feel? Don't analyze it, but just recognize how it made you feel and accept it and welcome it. Some books move like a current. They kind of take you by the hand and kind of pull and push a little bit, but they can also remind you that there's momentum to life, and that's going to be reflected in your writing. Not everything is going to be 100%, all speed ahead, fast forward through everything. You gotta have a little push and pull, ebb and flow. And sometimes reading can remind you of that. Stop writing, put that left brain aside for a little bit, and just enjoy the experience of reading. Not necessarily the words, but just the pace, the slowing down, finding a comfy spot, a favorite beverage, and sit down and enjoy that book. I think writers flourish when they can have an active relationship with their books, especially over time. That writing life, that breathing, that evolution, it helps keep the creativity alive. I think it's something deeply human to return to books for company. Personally, as an introvert, I love it. But reading is often discussed in terms of education and entertainment, and of course it can be both, as we've been talking about. But there's another quality that matters just as much, and that's the book as companion through our lives. A good example of that for many, if you are a Christian, is the Bible. People return to that. People who know it by heart and have read it so many times, but people return to it for comfort. That can be the same for other books as well. You return to them for comfort. They're familiar, and they bring you a sense of peace, a sense of calm, a sense of joy. And you should embrace that, celebrate it, keep that book in as many forms as you can, whether it's audio, print, on an e-reader, just so that you always have access to it when you're feeling that urge for that level of solitude. So much of our work is quiet and internal and self-directed, that books can kind of help fill that gap of silence with a larger conversation. And it reminds you to sort of this ongoing tradition of people have that shape thought and emotion into language. We've written books of some sort since humans could write, and we've always put our thoughts down. And that's what we do as writers. They may take an allegorical shape onto our thoughts, or it may be absolutely straightforward informational. But we need both equally. And I don't mean to dwell on it, but I just really want to impress upon you this need, and it should be a desire for you, and that it's okay to step away from the keyboard and just relax and go explore through words these other places, these other worlds. Somebody who writes something that you don't. And you may notice that I'm reading Steve Berry. I don't write thrillers, but that's part of the attraction, is I'm reading something that I'm not writing. Because if I was reading science fiction while I'm writing a series, it's going to turn into something analytical. I'm going to start analyzing what I'm reading. I'm going to start looking at the structure of the story, the character development, and I'm not going to get any, I won't say I won't get any, but I will get less pleasure from it. Certainly no escapism. And then some would say you run the risk of some of that story that you're reading slipping into your own writing, and you don't want to run the risk of plagiarism. Now, some say that's not going to happen. I don't know. You could take it either way. I say, why run the risk? So I'll write science fiction for a while, then I stop, and I'll write romance for a little while. And while I'm writing romance, I'll read science fiction. While I'm writing science fiction, I may read romance or something else. So you can kind of take that advice for what it's worth. Again, there's two sides to that argument, but I say, why risk it? I write science fiction. I watch science fiction, so I have to be very careful not to let terms that are specific to a particular series in science fiction creep into my writing. So if there is something that a term or a phrase or a spaceship is called something, a certain type of spaceship is called by a certain name, a description, in, say, the Star Wars, like an X-Fighter. I want to make sure I don't have X-Fighter in my story. Disney might be upset about that if I use that term. Maybe not. It may not be copyrighted, but it's good to be aware. So that's my recommendation, is to write in one genre, read in another, until you're taking a break from writing, just to avoid any kind of crossover. That's just my personal opinion. Okay, well, that's just about all the time we have for this week, and I have gone way off topic from some of the things that I wanted to talk about with you this week, but that's okay, because I think we've had a good conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have. As always, I love hearing about what you're reading, or if you have any recommendations into reading material, whether it's fiction, escapism, nonfiction, craft, business. Let me know what's helped you, what's on your nightstand this week, and what's keeping you up at night as a page turner. I again appreciate so much you spending time with me today. This has been a lovely conversation to have, and honestly, I think one I needed to have. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so on Substack or at Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. You can find me as Melissa Story on both of those. Just a reminder, Melissa is spelled Milissa. And if you'd like to connect, you can reach me at Millie, Milly, at stitchesandstories.com. If you would like to check out any of my work, science fiction, romance, or crime novels, they are all available at stitchesandstories.com or wherever you buy books online. and I hope to see you here next week. Bye-bye.